What's going on, everybody? It's the Boxing Freaks. I want to talk a little about Ivan Baranchyk versus Peter Petrov, IBF Junior Welterweight Eliminator we had last Friday. I'll get straight to the point. So Baranchyk has a new trainer, Pedro Diaz, and before the fight they said that they wanted to focus on improving his defense. A couple of other things that I wanted to see personally going into the fight was I wanted to see him utilize the jab more to set up his combinations, and I also wanted to see him cut down on the sloppy mistakes. Really, in his last 4 fights, he's been somewhat of a inefficient fighter. Not because he didn't get the KOs necessarily, in my opinion, but the nature of the decisions just left a lot to be desired. He has a tendency to get sloppy by lunging in with his punches, which gets him off balance often. That and the disappearing jab, it just made him look like a basic straight line fighter, even though I think he has far more potential. The lunging and sloppiness, it also goes hand in hand with what I viewed as inefficiency because he wastes a lot of his punches and a lot of movement. There's a lot of wasted punches and movement, and oftentimes throughout these last 3 or 4 fights, he looks to be walking forward without a purpose, as opposed to smartly and efficiently stalking his opponent. So with that said, this was the biggest and toughest fight of his career without a doubt. Petrov is a former world champion challenger. He fought Maidana, Zlaticanin, Terry Flanagan, all former world titleists. He lost to all 3, and he's probably short of world class himself. I think Petrov is a great stepping stone for a fighter like Baranchyk to measure where he's at this point in his career. And you have to give both men credit for taking the fight on short notice. For Petrov, he went from fighting Terry Flanagan in Manchester Arena for a world title to taking a short notice fight in South Dakota against a young, hungry, undefeated 25-year-old. And it's the type of fight you pick up on short notice just to collect a check and likely lose. But he still had some great moments, and he showed a lot of heart and a lot of toughness. And even though he lost, he gave a great account of himself. For Baranchyk, you have to give him credit because not only is this a more experienced opponent than his prior one, but it's a completely contrasting style. Petrov is more of an inside pocket fighter, and Baranchyk's last opponent was a Ranger boxer, so there wasn't much time for him to have to make the adjustment that he had to make. But I do think Petrov was a perfect showcase opponent for him, with the perfect style for him to kind of make a stamp on a good performance and improve on some of the mistakes and issues he's had in his last few fights. The fight itself, it was entertaining, and like I said, I was looking for a few things in particular with Baranchyk, which is what I want to focus on. And I also wanted to see if he was able to correct some of his mistakes that he's made in his last 3 or 4 fights, some of the mistakes he was prone to make. And also, I wanted to see, indeed, if they did improve their defense a bit, which is what they talked about, which is what I heard they talk about. I wanted to see if there were some improvements. And the opening bell of the first round, Baranchyk literally knocked Petrov down with the jab, with the first punch of a fight. Baranchyk has a stiff jab, but without it, he's prone to be picked apart by a superior technician. And in his division, there are plenty of those at the top level. And that's been one of the problems in his last 3-4 fights. He just looked vulnerable when you imagine him facing one of the top fighters in the division. Petrov landed some punches in the first after getting up, but really Baranchyk controlled the first round, and he won the round. However, there were a few things that stood out to me, which is what I want to talk about. In the first round alone, I noticed somewhat of a tale of two tapes in regards to his defense. At one point in the round, he lunged forward wildly, which is one of the things that I'm sure that's what that's what was been killing a lot of his fans in particular, and commentators, people watching the fights in his last 3 or 4, is that he lunges forward wildly, and he does it quite often, and he loses his balance a lot. But I noticed in the first round, he lunged forward wildly with his left hand, and Petrov, he couldn't capitalize on that mistake. But obviously against a faster, more skilled, and especially more powerful boxer, that continues to be a dangerous proposition for Baranchyk. It's not something you want to see. But towards the end of the round, he made a nice subtle defensive maneuver that I noticed. I caught it. When he was trying to get on the inside towards Petrov, Petrov threw a couple of punches, and Baranchyk kind of used his footwork and upper body to duck under a couple of those punches. Once again, it was subtle. It was really slight, but I caught that, and that's what he needs to do as he steps up the competition, because he's tended to just stand and leave his face open in the past. In the second round, he knocked Petrov down again, and early in the round, I noticed him again. He lunged forward wildly with his left. It's just something I noticed. And he just, he doesn't have to do that. Why? Well, because he shows some of the potential great things that he can do with his offense in that round itself. In the second round, midway through the round, he threw a jab, and he followed it up with a right uppercut immediately. He was committed to the jab in this round, and early in the fight, he was double, triple jabbing very often. I really like how he threw that jab and right uppercut in the round. He's showing some of his creativity, and unloading kind of that full arsenal that he needs to have with his power. He needs to open up the creativity and unload the entire arsenal to really utilize the natural power and heavy hands that he has, to take advantage of it. And I think that's something that he also failed to do for long periods of time in some of his most recent fights. And in the third round, Baranchyk, he mixed it up even more. The round started off, and he tripled up with the jab. He snuck in some hard left hooks, and some of his most impressive work at the rounds, when he got the third knockdown of the fight, he landed kind of a double body shot on Petrov that dropped him. In the first 3 rounds, aside from those 2 times he lunged forward when he really didn't have to, Baranchyk was really, he was putting on a great performance and showing improvements in all the areas he needed to, if he's to make a splash at world class, in my opinion. He had good movement. It led to some nice defensive maneuvers at times, but for the most part, he was there to be hit. And he left himself open to be hit even in those first 3 rounds. And Petrov had no trouble in offense of his own. He had success, and he was very active, especially after getting off the canvas each time, even if it didn't necessarily bother or trouble Baranchyk. But the thing with Baranchyk, one thing is with him, he wants to take a punch to throw 3 or 4, right? The problem is this. What happened shortly after the first 3 rounds, in the 4th and 5th rounds, Petrov had way more success than in the first 3 rounds. Petrov wasn't taking as many shots, and he increased his own activity, and he really landed a few bombs, and I thought he got the better of some of the exchanges they had. The problem is that as improved and disciplined Baranchyk was in the first few rounds, I thought he resorted back to some of his old tactics, starting with the 4th and 5th rounds. So when he's not ducking under punches like he did at the end of the first round, he's willing and wants to take a couple of punches to land a few of his own, right? But what happens when you take that punch, but you don't land on the few that you throw? Once again, against a fighter like Garcia or Lipinets, for example, that's dangerous, and that's not going to be a formula for success. But after the first few rounds in this one, there were far more swing and misses by Baranchyk than there were landed punches. I didn't actually catch him lunging forward too much in any of these rounds like he did those 2 times in the first 2 rounds. He was more disciplined on his feet, but he became more of a straight line fighter, sat in Petrov's range, took a couple of punches flush, and then his retaliation were swing and misses. So he wasn't taking a punch and landing 3-4 of his own. He was taking a punch or 2 and swinging and missing with a few of his own. Petrov ultimately couldn't capitalize, but he was scoring points in these moments. So Baranchyk just went away from the jab a bit. He wasn't really setting up his punches with it anymore, or following up with the creative combinations he did earlier, when he was mixing it up with the right uppercut, following a jab, and double body shots, throwing left hooks in there, sneaking them in. And he actually went away from the body, and that was one of the biggest things I noticed, is that after the 3rd round body shot knockdown, he actually headhunted a lot more, and he was overly aggressive when Petrov was not hurt, and when Petrov regrouped, by swinging and missing, not jabbing to set up combos, and he even almost tripped over his own feet at one point by losing his balance. But when Petrov was hurt after each of the knockdowns, which there was one in the second round, by the way. He was under aggressive, which is fine if you're able to execute, but he didn't actually execute, right, each of those times. So I actually like the more patient, measured approach that Baranchyk looked to have after each knockdown. And you can tell that after the last two knockdowns, for example, I mean, the first knockdown was just a flash knockdown. You know, it was a jab right when the round started. I mean, it was good to see him throw the jab, but Petrov just got caught off balance, and you know, he fell. It was just a flash knockdown, but you could tell after the last two knockdowns, for example, he looked like he was trying to be more measured and calculated with his punch output. He wasn't actually he actually wasn't just trying to steamroll and overly aggressive, just kind of, you know, dump Petrov, you know, wildly. But when he did throw, for the most part, he missed with the few punches, you know, he threw, and he didn't really land anything of substance after the, you know, those two times that Petrov got off the canvas. But it was actually good. It was good to see him trying to utilize a more smart, you know, smart pressure, smart stalking approach, which is what he was doing the times when he had, you know, Petrov right immediately off the canvas. You know, he didn't swing wildly. He wasn't really, you know, he, like I say, didn't have success, but he didn't swing wildly. He wasn't coming forward and leaving himself exposed or punching himself out. You could tell that he was actually looking to be more measured and calculated. At least that's what it looked like to me. But the thing is that it was the times when Petrov regrouped, you know, the mid-action type of moments where you'd like to see the same approach a bit more, and less of that over-aggressive swing and miss style that we've seen in the past, because that's what was happening in the fourth and fifth. He went away from a lot of the things that he was doing well in the first three rounds. He resorted back to some of his old tactics, and for him to be a more complete offensive fighter and to improve efficiency, I think we need to see that smart pressure, smart stalking approach, that measured and calculated, really sitting there thinking in the ring type of approach. Mid-round, mid-action, when the guy's not hurt, you know, hurt him with that, you know, set up what's going to follow with an approach like that. For him in particular, given how, you know, a lot of fans thought he looked in his last 4 rounds, it will benefit a fighter like him to try to utilize that more. But nevertheless, in the 7th round, you know, after Petrov had some success for a couple of rounds, Baranchyk, he got back to his crisp, more fluid offense. He landed a ton of hard overhand rights. Petrov was really taking some punishment in the 7th. He didn't actually get knocked out or go down again, but the referee did stop the fight after the 7th. And you have to give Petrov props for getting off the floor 3 times and still standing at the final bell. And for Baranchyk, it was his biggest win. And I actually would love to see him have a couple more fights with Pedro Diaz to continue to work on some of the mistakes he's prone to resorting to. Because I think with a couple more fights against a logical, gradual step up in competition, he can correct those mistakes and become a more efficient offensive fighter and really have more of a chance to become a force in the division. The problem is there aren't many more step-ups before D's step-up yet, and he's already right in the mix. You know, he's put himself in a position to challenge for a title likely by the end of the year, by the end of 2018, if not early 2019. So it's going to be interesting to see, once again, how much more improvement he can make in a short span, and how good he'd look in a world-level fight. You know, sometimes when boxers fight for a title, they're finished products, and sometimes they're not. And you have a young fighter with a high ceiling, but who has so much more room for improvement, and that's how I feel about Baranchyk. But they're right there on the scene already, on the title scene already. And with Baranchyk, he's going to have to adjust on the fly, you know, because he's in that title picture already. You know, who knows what will happen with the IBF title and division. You know, this was an IBF eliminator. Once again, Lipinets lost it the next day on Saturday, the IBF title. And if he would have beaten Garcia on Saturday, I could have saw that fight happening soon. Lipinets, Baranchyk, but Garcia, you know, obviously pound for pound fighter already. You know, probably has bigger fights lined up. I'm not exactly sure if he plans to stay at 140 and defend his belt. Maybe somebody else could speak on that. But if he doesn't, Baranchyk for a vacant IBF title could be interesting. Otherwise, it's unfortunate that he's next. In my opinion, it's unfortunate that he's next in line for the IBF title and not the WO title, for example, which Terry Flanagan has at the moment. Because I think Baranchyk at this point in his career, which kind of sounds absurd because he has a deep amateur pedigree, but he's still only 25. It's easy to forget. But Baranchyk at this point, with how much more room for improvement he has, I think he has a chance to look better against the winner of Terry Flanagan, Maurice Hooker, the WBO title fight that's coming up soon. And either of those two guys would be the logical next step up level for Baranchyk after a fighter like Petrov, if there were no titles in the picture, right? So, whereas Garcia, I mean, he's just on another level right now with his experience. And Lipinets, even though his opponent list and resume, isn't much different than Baranchyk's or Hooker's prior to his Garcia fight, I just think he's a special fighter. I think he will be a special fighter. And I think he's overall a more complete fighter and ready fighter at this point of his career. With that said, overall, Baranchyk, I thought he put on a great performance against Petrov. He improved on a lot of things. He showed a lot of things that he wasn't showing us in his last 4 fights. He resorted back to some of his own mistakes. But he recently switched camps. He has a great trainer, and he could very well project to be that same type of complete fighter that I think Lipinets already is, with just a little bit more time.